I still remember the sound before I remember the number. A soft electronic beep. Too clean. Too final. I was standing inside the bank, surrounded by strangers who smelled of perfume, sweat, and impatience. The air conditioning was too cold for a place that held people's life savings. My hands were rough from years of work, gripping a printed slip that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. When I looked down again, my eyes froze. The balance was wrong. Not low. Not reduced. Empty. For a second, my mind refused to move. My ears rang, like the room had gone underwater. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed. A pen dropped on the floor. Normal life continued while mine cracked open in silence. I refreshed the screen again. Same result. 0. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. I scanned the transaction list, hoping to see a mistake, a glitch, anything I could blame except myself. Then I saw it. The last transfer. The name attached to it didn't belong to a stranger or a scammer. It was my daughter. My vision blurred, not with tears yet, but with disbelief. This money wasn't extra. It wasn't spare change. It was years of waking up before sunrise, of saying next time to myself, of choosing responsibility over rest. This was everything I had protected for decades. I slowly looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. People were close. Too close. I wondered if they could see it on my face, the moment a parent realizes something sacred has been violated. My mouth went dry. My legs felt weak, like they might give out right there between the counters and the waiting chairs. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt locked. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she needed it temporarily. Maybe there was an emergency she was too scared to explain. I clung to those thoughts like a lifeline because the alternative was unbearable. Still, one detail refused to leave my mind. The transfer wasn't small. It was deliberate, and it had been done quietly. As I walked out of the bank, the glass doors closing behind me with a dull thud, one question kept echoing louder than everything else. If my own daughter could take my hard-earned money and lie to me about it, what else had she been hiding all this time? Before that moment in the bank, my world had revolved around one belief. No matter how hard life became, my daughter would always be my safe place. Everything I endured felt justified because it led back to her. Every sacrifice had a face, a future, a reason. I wasn't always careful with myself, but I was careful with her. I worked longer hours than my body wanted to handle. I ignored pain that should have been checked, skipped rest that I had earned, and told myself I would slow down later. Later became my favorite lie. I used it on myself so often that it felt harmless. As long as she was secure, I was fine. I remembered her childhood clearly. Small hands wrapped around my fingers. School fees paid before electricity bills. New books for her, old shoes for me. I never said it out loud, but deep down, I believed this was how love was supposed to look. Quiet. Unquestioned. One-directional, if necessary. As she grew older, my pride grew with her. Every achievement felt like proof that my struggles had meaning. When she spoke confidently, when people praised her intelligence, I stood a little taller. I told myself that trust was the reward for being a good parent. I never imagined it could also become the greatest risk. The first changes were so subtle, they almost felt imaginary. Shorter phone calls. Replies that came hours later instead of minutes. Conversations that stayed on the surface. I blamed myself for noticing. I told myself she was busy, independent, finally building her own life. That was supposed to be a good thing. But sometimes late at night, doubt crept in. She would avoid certain questions. Her explanations felt rehearsed, like answers she had practiced alone. When money came up in conversation, her tone shifted just slightly, enough to make me uncomfortable, but not enough to accuse her of anything. I ignored that discomfort every time. I didn't want to become the suspicious parent who ruins a relationship by imagining problems. There were moments I should have paused. Times when she asked about my savings with unusual interest. When she brushed off my concerns too quickly. When she reassured me without being asked. Each time, I chose trust. Not because I was naive, but because I believed love deserved the benefit of the doubt. I had built my life around being dependable, around being the one who never said no when it mattered. I thought that consistency would be returned in loyalty. I thought honesty was automatic between us. I never questioned whether she saw my sacrifices or simply expected them. Looking back, the cracks were there long before the balance disappeared. I just filled them with excuses. I told myself distance was normal, that secrecy was privacy, that my unease was just fear of letting go. The truth is, I didn't want to look too closely, because if something was wrong, it meant everything I believed about our bond might be fragile. And I wasn't ready to face that possibility. That day at the bank didn't start the betrayal. It only exposed it. As I sat alone later, replaying years of memories, one realization settled heavily in my chest. Trust doesn't usually break in one moment. It erodes quietly while you're too busy loving someone to notice. And the most painful part wasn't the money. It was the growing fear that the daughter I trusted with my life had slowly learned how to hide parts of herself from me, and I had helped her do it by never asking the questions I was afraid to hear the answers to. The real betrayal didn't arrive with noise or drama. It arrived quietly, through numbers on a screen that refused to change no matter how many times I checked them. After leaving the bank, I sat in my car with the engine off, staring straight ahead as if movement itself might make the situation real. My phone rested in my palm, heavy with possibilities I wasn't ready to face. I opened my banking app again, slower this time. I forced myself to read every line, every date, every transaction. That's when I noticed something I had missed before. This wasn't a single withdrawal. It was a pattern. Small amounts taken first, then larger ones, spread out just enough to avoid attention. It wasn't panic or desperation. It was planning. My stomach tightened. I scrolled further back, my fingers cold despite the heat outside. The timeline stretched over weeks, maybe months. Each transfer carried the same destination, the same name, hers. The realization hit me in waves, each one stronger than the last. This wasn't an emergency decision made in fear. This was intentional, repeated, hidden. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. My chest burned as denial tried to fight its way back in. I told myself she must have meant to tell me, that there had to be a reason she couldn't explain yet. I searched for excuses like someone searching for air underwater. Anything to delay the truth. But the facts didn't bend. I thought about the times she had looked me in the eye and spoken casually about money, about plans, about her future. I replayed those moments with a new awareness, noticing what I had missed before. The confidence, the lack of hesitation, the ease with which she spoke while knowing something I didn't. That's when the emotional weight truly set in. This wasn't just about money being taken. It was about trust being handled carelessly, about the ease with which she had crossed a line I never imagined she would approach. I felt foolish, not because I had trusted her, but because I had trusted her without limits. My hands began to shake. Not from anger yet, but from grief. A quiet, heavy grief that settled deep in my chest. I had raised her to be honest, to respect effort, to understand the value of what others worked for. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been replaced with entitlement. I checked my messages, my call logs, searching for any sign of guilt, any hint that she had tried to reach out. There was nothing. No missed calls. No half-written apologies. Just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any confession could have. I realized then that the lie wasn't just in the act itself. The lie lived in every normal conversation we had shared while this was happening. Every laugh, every reassurance, every moment she allowed me to believe everything was fine. The conflict inside me became unbearable. One part of me wanted to protect her, to minimize what I was seeing, to shield her from consequences the way I always had. The other part demanded the truth, demanded accountability, demanded respect. I felt torn between being a parent and being a person who had been wronged. As the weight of it all settled in, one thought refused to leave my mind. If she could hide this so calmly, so carefully, then this betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a choice. And once that realization took hold, there was no going back to the comfort of not knowing. The moment I accepted that truth, I understood something else just as clearly. This was only the beginning. Whatever she had done, whatever she had hidden, I hadn't seen the worst of it yet. After that day, life didn't explode all at once. It tightened. Every morning I woke up with the same heavy pressure in my chest, like something unfinished was pressing down on me. I went through my routine on autopilot, but nothing felt normal anymore. The smallest things started to feel suspicious. Silence became louder than arguments ever were. I didn't confront her right away. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I was afraid of what those answers might do to what little peace I had left. Once spoken, the truth couldn't be unheard. Once accused, the relationship could never return to what it was. I kept telling myself I needed time, but what I really needed was courage. The clues kept appearing anyway. She began calling more often, her tone overly casual, almost rehearsed. She talked about unrelated things, filling the space with unnecessary details, as if trying to keep me distracted. When I mentioned stress or finances in passing, she quickly changed the subject. Too quickly. My unease deepened every time she did that. I started paying attention to things I once ignored. Her spending habits didn't match the story she told. Her confidence seemed unearned. She spoke about plans that required resources she claimed not to have. Each detail on its own meant nothing. Together, they formed a picture I didn't want to see. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations from the past few months. Words I had once accepted now felt staged. Promises sounded hollow. I wondered how long she had been lying without flinching. How many times she had looked at me knowing what she had done, and chosen silence anyway. The pressure came from all sides. Bills reminded me of the money that was gone. My body reminded me of the years I had worked without complaint. Friends and relatives asked harmless questions about my plans, unaware they were touching a wound I was desperately trying to hide. I smiled through it all, feeling like I was carrying a secret that was slowly crushing me. I felt trapped in my own role. As a parent, I was expected to protect her. As a victim, I wanted answers. As a person, I needed respect. Those identities collided inside me, leaving me paralyzed. Every time I picked up my phone to call her, my hand froze. I didn't know which version of myself would speak if she answered. The doubt became relentless. What if I was wrong? What if confronting her destroyed our bond permanently? What if staying silent destroyed me instead? I checked my account daily, even though I knew nothing would change. Each time, the same emptiness stared back at me, reinforcing the reality I was trying to avoid. The longer I waited, the heavier the burden became. It felt like the truth was expanding, filling every corner of my life. I began to notice my own behavior shifting. I became quieter, less patient, more withdrawn. The people around me sensed something was wrong, but I couldn't explain it without opening a door I wasn't ready to walk through. Carrying the truth alone was exhausting, but sharing it felt dangerous. What hurt the most was the growing realization that she wasn't struggling the way I was. She moved freely, spoke easily, laughed without hesitation. That contrast made the pressure unbearable. While I was drowning in questions, she appeared untouched by consequence. That imbalance lit something inside me. I realized I couldn't keep absorbing the weight of her actions in silence. Love shouldn't require self-destruction. Trust shouldn't demand blindness. The longer I avoided confrontation, the more control I gave away. By the end of that week, one thing became clear. The truth was no longer just about money or betrayal. It was about whether I would continue sacrificing myself to protect someone who had already chosen to hurt me. And once that thought took hold, I knew the next step would change everything. I chose a time when there would be no interruptions. No noise. No witnesses to soften the impact. The moment I decided to confront her, my hands stopped shaking. Not because I was calm, but because something inside me had hardened. I carried the weight of proof with me, and it felt heavier than anger. When we finally spoke, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her right away. I asked simple questions, the kind that invite honesty if honesty still exists. Her answers came quickly, too quickly, like doors slamming shut before I could look inside. Each response sounded polished, practiced, almost confident. I watched her carefully. Her expressions didn't match the situation. There was no confusion, no concern,
no hesitation.
Instead, there was a strange ease, as if she believed this conversation would pass the way others always had. That realization hurt more than any words could have. When I placed the evidence in front of her, the room seemed to change. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The air felt heavier. The silence stretched longer than it should have. I expected shock, maybe fear, something that resembled guilt. What I got was indifference wrapped in patience. She dismissed the details with casual explanations, minimizing what had been taken, reframing it as something temporary, something I shouldn't make a big deal out of. There was a moment where she suggested I was overreacting, that I didn't understand how things worked anymore. That was the moment something broke. The line wasn't loud, but it was sharp. A single remark designed to make me feel small, outdated, irrelevant. It wasn't just defensive. It was mocking. And in that instant, I understood something clearly for the first time. She didn't think she had done anything wrong. The conflict escalated quickly after that. Not with shouting, but with distance. With her refusing to answer directly. With me refusing to back down. Every time I pressed for clarity, she shifted the focus, turned the conversation into an attack on my character, my judgment, my past decisions. I felt the ground move beneath me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a power play. She was used to being protected, to being believed, to being forgiven before she ever asked. And now that protection was standing in front of her, demanding accountability instead of offering cover, the emotional weight became unbearable. I felt anger rise, but beneath it was something deeper, a sense of loss, not just of money, but of the person I thought she was. The daughter I had trusted without question was being replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Every attempt to connect was met with deflection. Every appeal to our history was met with impatience. She spoke as if the past was irrelevant, as if my sacrifices were expected, not earned. That realization cut deeper than the betrayal itself. I reached my breaking point quietly. There was no dramatic outburst. Just a moment where I realized continuing the conversation would only cost me more dignity. I stopped trying to convince her, stopped asking her to understand. And in that silence, the power shifted slightly. For the first time, she noticed the change. The arrogance faded, replaced briefly by uncertainty. She sensed she was losing control of the situation, and that scared her more than the truth ever had. But by then, it was too late to rewind what had been said. As the conversation ended, one thought echoed clearly in my mind. If she could stand there and belittle me after taking everything I had worked for, then confronting her wasn't the final step. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. And whatever came next would no longer be shaped by fear or guilt, but by truth. The shift didn't happen all at once. It started quietly, in the space after our confrontation, when the noise settled and I was left alone with my thoughts. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't confused. I wasn't second-guessing myself. The denial that had protected me for so long finally collapsed under its own weight. Something inside me changed. I stopped trying to understand her behavior emotionally and began looking at it logically. I reviewed everything again, but this time without excuses. The dates, the amounts, the patterns. What once felt overwhelming now felt organized, almost obvious. I realized I hadn't been powerless. I had only been unwilling to see clearly. That's when the unexpected happened. A message arrived from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was careful. The kind of message written by someone who hesitates before speaking because they're afraid of the consequences. They mentioned my name, then hers, then money. My pulse quickened before I even finished reading. What followed was confirmation. Not opinions. Not rumors. Evidence. Information I hadn't asked for but clearly needed. Details that matched what I already knew, filling in the gaps I couldn't explain on my own. It became clear that what I had uncovered was only part of a larger picture. There were layers beneath the surface, and she hadn't been as careful as she believed. For the first time since this began, I felt something other than pain.
Clarity.
The fear that had kept me silent started to loosen its grip. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking, planning, observing. I began documenting everything, organizing facts instead of emotions. Each step grounded me further, reminding me that truth has weight, and lies eventually collapse under it. The power balance shifted quietly.
She didn't know yet.
She still believed she controlled the narrative, that confusion and guilt would keep me passive. But I was no longer operating from shock. I understood now that the real turning point wasn't confronting her. It was choosing myself over the role I had been trapped in. I noticed changes in my own behavior. I spoke less, listened more. I stopped offering reassurance. I stopped explaining myself. That absence unsettled her more than any argument ever could. Control relies on predictability, and I had become unpredictable. What surprised me most was how steady I felt. The anger was still there, but it no longer consumed me. It fueled focus instead of chaos. I realized that justice didn't require rage. It required patience. And patience, for the first time, was on my side. As more pieces fell into place, I saw the full shape of the situation. The entitlement, the planning, the confidence that came from believing there would never be consequences. That belief was about to be tested. I understood something crucial then. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was about restoring balance. About refusing to let betrayal define the end of my story. I had spent years giving without limits. Now, for the first time, I was setting them. The truth was no longer something I feared uncovering. It was something I was ready to use. As I prepared for what came next, one thought grounded me completely. When the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't arrive as an accusation or an emotional outburst. It would arrive as undeniable reality. And when that moment came, she wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. Because the turning point wasn't when I found the evidence. It was when I stopped protecting the lie. The truth didn't come out in a single dramatic confession. It surfaced the way real truths do, slowly at first, then all at once, leaving no room to escape. By the time it happened, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was ready. Everything unfolded in a setting where denial couldn't survive. Documents were present. Records were clear. The facts spoke before anyone else could. What had once been my private nightmare was now visible, tangible, impossible to dismiss. Each piece of evidence landed quietly, but the impact was heavy. The room changed. The confidence she carried so effortlessly before began to crack. Not loudly, not immediately, but in subtle ways. Her posture shifted. Her words slowed. The certainty she relied on evaporated as the story she had been telling no longer fit the reality in front of her. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the narrative. I watched closely, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. The full scope of what she had done became undeniable. The timing, the intent, the planning. Every attempt to minimize it collapsed under the weight of detail. What had once been brushed off as misunderstanding was now exposed as deliberate action. The lie had been carefully constructed, but the truth was stronger. There was a moment of silence that felt endless. Not the kind filled with shock, but the kind that follows realization. When someone understands they can no longer pretend. That moment carried more emotion than any argument ever could. I felt it in my chest, heavy and final.
She tried to speak.
The words came out scattered, defensive, searching for space to land. But there was nowhere left to hide. Every explanation unraveled as quickly as it was offered. The image she had relied on, the one that kept her protected, shattered in real time. This wasn't just exposure. It was recognition. Others saw what I had been carrying alone. The burden lifted slightly as the truth spread beyond me. I wasn't the confused parent anymore. I wasn't the overreacting figure she had painted me to be. I was simply someone who had been wronged, and the facts made that undeniable. The emotional impact hit me unexpectedly. Not relief, not victory, a deep, aching sadness. Because seeing the truth so clearly also meant accepting that the relationship I believed in had been built on assumptions that no longer held. The daughter I had trusted unconditionally had made choices that couldn't be undone by apologies or explanations. Justice didn't arrive with applause or celebration. It arrived quietly, firmly, without emotion. Consequences followed, not as punishment fueled by anger, but as the natural result of actions finally meeting accountability. The balance that had been broken was being restored, piece by piece. For the first time since this began, I felt grounded. As everything settled, I realized something important. I didn't need her to admit guilt out loud. I didn't need tears or regret to validate my experience. The truth was visible.
And that was enough.
The climax of this story wasn't the exposure itself. It was the moment I stopped questioning my own reality. When the lies fell apart, they didn't just reveal what she had done. They revealed who I was beneath the fear, beneath the guilt, beneath the years of silent sacrifice. Someone who deserved honesty. Someone who deserved respect. And as the truth settled into the room, heavy and undeniable, I knew one thing with certainty. This chapter was ending. And for the first time in a long while, the ending wasn't defined by betrayal, but by clarity. After everything was exposed, life didn't suddenly become better. It became quieter. The noise that had lived in my head for weeks slowly faded, replaced by a silence that felt unfamiliar but necessary. There was no relief rush, no dramatic sense of victory. Just the understanding that something irreversible had happened, and I was standing on the other side of it. The consequences unfolded without drama.
No shouting.
No public scenes. Just reality doing its work. What had been hidden for so long was now visible, and that alone changed everything. I didn't need to demand justice loudly. The truth carried enough weight on its own. Accountability didn't come from anger. It came from clarity. Emotionally, the cost lingered. I mourned more than money. I mourned the belief that love alone could protect a bond. I mourned the version of my daughter I had held onto for years, the one I defended even when doubt whispered otherwise. Letting go of that image felt like losing someone who never truly existed the way I thought they did. The healing was slow and uneven. Some days I felt strong, grounded, certain I had done the right thing. Other days, the memories crept back in quietly. Moments of pride, small acts of care, pieces of a past that now felt fractured. I let myself feel those moments without fighting them. Pain acknowledged hurts less than pain buried. What changed the most was how I saw myself. For years, I believed my value came from sacrifice, from endurance, from how much I could give without expecting anything in return. This experience shattered that belief. I learned that boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of survival. That self-respect is not something you earn from others, but something you choose for yourself. The distance between us became permanent, and accepting that was harder than I expected. But with time, I understood something important. Peace doesn't always come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes it comes from stepping away and allowing yourself to heal without reopening the wound again and again. I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped hoping for explanations. I stopped measuring closure by someone else's regret. Closure came when I accepted the truth fully, without excuses or softened edges. When I allowed myself to move forward without carrying guilt that didn't belong to me. When I realized that protecting myself didn't mean I loved less, it meant I finally loved myself enough. Today, my life feels steadier. Not perfect, not untouched, but honest. I make decisions differently now. I listen to discomfort instead of dismissing it. I trust, but I verify. I give, but I no longer disappear in the process. The betrayal changed me, but it didn't destroy me. It stripped away illusions. It exposed weakness I didn't know I carried. And it forced me to rebuild on something stronger than blind trust. Self-respect. If you're watching this and parts of my story feel uncomfortably familiar, know this. You are not weak for trusting. You are not wrong for loving deeply. but you are allowed to stop protecting people who choose to hurt you. Your story doesn't end where the betrayal begins. If this story connected with you, subscribe for more real, raw stories like this. Comment if you've lived through something similar or felt this kind of pain. And share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone.